Matthew chapter 20. I know there's a different text listed in the bulletin, and in a place where the sermon texts are scheduled for about 5 years out at a time. I know that might throw the earth off its axis, but I am a deficient preacher in many ways, and I called Lee desperately yesterday afternoon. I said, "Brother, Luke 14 just didn't happen, and I don't know if Matthew 20 is going to be happening. We'll find out in just a few minutes." But I asked if I could have permission to do something different, and I'm thankful to be able to do that today. I trust the Lord has a good purpose for us in this. I'm so honored to be here. For years, CCC has stood for Camelot Community Church in my family. That's because to me it was just this Narnia-like place where pastors kept watch over their people's souls, and people eagerly attended Sunday school classes about systematic theology and Christian ethics, and the pastors played croquet together, and it just didn't seem real to me. I have to say that through the years, I've never been a member at Cornerstone, but the Lord has used this body as a whole and so many individuals who I wish I could take time to name, but it would take 20 minutes to do so, who have encouraged me and been personally kind to Candace and me. Y'all have prayed for us here in your corporate worship gatherings through the years, and Lee has talked me down off the ledge so many times when I didn't think I could go on, and I'm so grateful for each of you and for the Lord's grace at work in you. I love you, Lee, Tom, Aaron, Nathan, all of you. Thank you so much. This is a deep, deep honor for me. Matthew chapter 20, I'm going to read the first 16 verses for us today, and if you're able, let me invite you to stand just one more time as we honor the reading of God's Word, Matthew 21 through 16. Jesus says, "For the kingdom of heaven is like a master of a house who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. After agreeing with the laborers for a denarius a day, he sent them into his vineyard. And going out about the third hour, he saw others standing idle in the marketplace. And to them he said, 'You go into the vineyard too, and whatever is right I will give you.' So they went. Going out again about the 6th hour and the 9th hour, he did the same. And about the 11th hour he went out and found others standing. And he said to them, 'Why do you stand here idle all day?' They said to him, 'Because no one has hired us.' He said to them, 'You go into the vineyard too.' And when evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, 'Call the laborers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last up to the first.' And when those hired about the 11th hour came, each of them received a denarius. Now when those hired first came, they thought they would receive more, but each of them also received a denarius. And on receiving it, they grumbled at the master of the house, saying, 'These last worked only 1 hour, and you've made them equal to us, who have borne the burden of the day and the scorching heat.' But he replied to one of them, 'Friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for a denarius? Take what belongs to you and go. I choose to give to this last worker as I give to you. Am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? Or do you begrudge my generosity? So the last will be first, and the first will be last.'" This is God's word. You can be seated. It's okay to admit that this parable irritates the fire out of you. Jesus meant it that way. He intended to do that. And usually when Jesus irritates us with his teachings or with his parables, it's because he's wanting to do very particular kind of work in our hearts that we need very much, but that we're also very resistant to. So what's the deal with this very irritating parable? What does Jesus have designed for us in this? Well, I don't know how many parents are out there today in this stage, but for many years, the sippy cup full of milk was a fixture in our home life. Are there any sippy cup full of milk people out there today? Toddlers, if juniors graduated beyond that bottle, but mom and dad still want to be able to hand him or her a cool, refreshing beverage without worrying about spills. Just a beautiful kind of scenario for everybody involved. We had sippy cups for years of different sizes and colors, and we never left home without them. They were always in our van wherever we were going. We were tossing sippy cups around all throughout the van, and it was a sweet relationship, except for some occasions when the relationship went sour, and it was usually in the summer months. And in those summer months, often if you've got small children and it's very labor intensive and you're having to unbuckle car seats and get people out and get diaper bags and supplies wherever you're going, sometimes you're a little hasty when you're departing the vehicle. And I can remember some occasions where we would go maybe just to Walmart, maybe just to Kroger. That's kind of a big event when you have small kids. We would go to a store like that in the summer months, and we're eager to get off that asphalt. My heart probably was in a really bad place, but we're just trying to get those youngins and get in that store. And sometimes in our haste, the sippy cup full of milk would be left behind. We even had a name for them, Mippy Sippies. That's what the Smiths call them. And that sippy cup would be left behind. And we wouldn't have to be gone but for about 30 minutes. All our Walmart trips take a lot longer than that. So we would have to be gone for about an hour. And when we would come back in that oven-like atmosphere of that minivan, a transformation would have taken place. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? That once cool, refreshing beverage had now congealed. It had hardened into another substance altogether, a solid, perfectly conformed to the contours of that ridged sippy cup. It had soured, it had turned on that 95-degree day, closed up in that black minivan on that Walmart parking lot. Some of you have been there before, I can tell. And what always amazed me, I knew that milk turned, I knew that milk soured, I knew those kinds of things happened, but what always amazed me in those moments is just how fast it happened. I mean, just so quick. We were just in Walmart for 45 minutes, and that's all it took for that delicious, nourishing treat to be turned into something so sour. And this story is about how quickly grace can sour in the hearts of the people of Jesus. It's about how fast, how rapidly that sweet mercy of God that flows down to us through the cross of Jesus that we all love so much, that we've been singing about all morning long, just how fast it can turn in the oven-like atmosphere of our hearts. Grace has a short shelf life in the hearts of sinners like me and like you. And it's a theme all throughout the Bible. It's a theme that we find in the Old and the New Testaments, as we're going to see. But it doesn't take long for those of us who have been put in first place by the mercy of God to get the feeling that we've been put in last. You know what I'm talking about? And Jesus wants to speak to us today about how recipients of grace can deteriorate and can descend into being grumblers. But here's the good news. Jesus looks on our grumbling hearts with love. Isn't that good news? He looks tenderly on my grumbling heart and your grumbling heart, and he loves us, and he doesn't want to leave us in grumbling. He doesn't want to leave us in bitterness and envy and discontentment and all those kinds of things that grace can turn into in our hearts over the course of life. Jesus wants to bring us to a place of gratitude, and I think that's what this parable is all about. So I want you to notice with me, first of all, that Jesus shows us in Matthew chapter 20 a portrait of grace. That's where we have to begin, a portrait of grace. Now, we've got to understand the picture that Jesus is painting at the beginning of this story. We have to understand the desperation of the people involved. He takes us to a marketplace, a public place at about dawn. Daylight has not quite broken yet, but already there's a crowd of people milling around. It's a variety of men of different ages, different stages of life, and they're all holding cardboard signs up that say, "We'll work for food." This is a group of day laborers. These are people who are completely poor, impoverished. They don't have property of their own. They don't have riches of their own. They don't have training, job training. They don't really have a very promising future for their career stretching out ahead of them. Every single day, they are utterly dependent on someone else intervening in their lives and hiring them to work for the day. Come work for me for the day, and I'll pay you a day's wages. That's how their families survive. Is someone going to pick me up to allow me to work for them today? So these are people who are desperate financially speaking. But there's also a deeper desperation that's going on here. And those of us who are here today who've gone without work for a long period of time, for any length of time, you know that to do without work when you want to work, that can be a very disorienting place to be, can it? And particularly in a shame and honor culture like Jesus' culture here in the New Testament in the Near Eastern world, shame and honor was such a big deal. To have to stand around all day hoping to get hired, hoping to work, and then to never be hired. And have to go home at the end of the day and tell your wife and your kids, not only are we going to have to tighten our belts once again tomorrow, but I had to walk past all those other husbands who did go to work today. I had to walk past all those other houses where people did have jobs. They did have meaningful things to do. And I've got nothing to talk about except standing around with my hands in my pockets. And so they're desperate on a number of levels gathered here in this marketplace. And it's about that time that this wealthy landowner rides up. And if it were today, I would picture this guy driving up in one of those like $89,000 F-350s with King Ranch interior. This is a guy with a lot of money. And this is a guy who's got property. He's a guy who is in power at the place where he lives. And it's kind of unusual that he would be the one showing up to hire day laborers, because we know he's got a foreman, somebody who's over an operation like this. He doesn't have to be doing this. He should be home sipping coffee and reading the newspaper at this hour of the day. He's got people who work for him to do this kind of thing. So this is somebody who, oddly, we don't understand quite why yet, is stepping far beneath his station to go out and fool with these people and to hire folks to work in his vineyard for that day. But nevertheless, he does it. And he looks out at this big crowd of people. Every single one of them would give their right arm to go to work that day. And he just picks out a wad of them. And he just says, you, and you, get in the truck. And you can work for me for the day. And I'll pay you a denarius. And they're thrilled. Now, I don't think that we're going to get the real punch of this parable if we miss the fact that this was a tremendous act of grace entering into these people's lives. This is not like you interviewing for a job and then getting that job and then collecting your paycheck, this kind of quid pro quo relationship. You need something, I need something, let's help each other out. This would be much more like a brother or a sister who has spent time in jail, or just getting out of drug rehab for the third or the fourth time, and someone hiring them. There's more going on there than a financial need, isn't there? This is someone who is getting involved in their lives and bringing them in when other people aren't willing to do it, restoring a dignity, restoring an honor. That's what this guy's doing. So these people are already experiencing tremendous grace. They would have been over the moon to get hired that day. They were thrilled. They've been rescued not only from this financial destitution, they're rescued from the shame that they would have been covered in with their families. They would have been singing all the way out to the vineyard by this vineyard keeper who has intervened in their lives. So this is already a feel-good story when those first hour workers get picked up, and they would have never been so happy to roll up their sleeves and work in the sun for this vineyard keeper who gave them a hand up when they needed it. So already it would be a feel-good story, but the story's just getting started, isn't it? Because meanwhile, back at the ranch, the vineyard owner can't get his mind off those other guys that he left standing around, helpless, unable to go do a business startup, unable to tend their own little garden or patch of ground because they don't have that, dependent completely on someone else coming and rescuing them. And so he does what we would never expect him to do. At about 9 o'clock, he gets back in the truck and he drives back out to town. And he looks at these guys and he says, okay, now you and y'all get in too and work out the rest of the day for me, and I promise I'll make it worth your while. And they are thrilled. I mean, the longer that you're standing out there, and nobody picks you up, the more that your hope is going to begin to sink. I don't know if I'm going to get selected. It's probably like it's going to be another one of those awful days where I'm not going to get to work. And so they're thrilled. This guy's coming. He's rescued them. He did not have to do this. And so they're singing all the way to the vineyard. But here's where it really gets kind of kooky. And a lot of these parables are like this. Jesus will paint these extravagant pictures of kind of these outsized characters we would never meet in real life. At about noon, on his lunch break, He says, man, darn, I know there's some more people standing out there. I hate the thought of them. I better just go make sure that somebody picked them up. And he drives back out and he says, okay, you 7 back there, y'all, if you're willing, just jump in with me and you can work out the rest of the day, and I promise I'll take care of you at the end of the day. And they are thrilled. And then he does it again at 3 o'clock, right? I mean, he just keeps doing it all through that. He's running the roads all afternoon long, picking up these guys to come and clip vines or whatever you do. I should have paid more attention to New Testament backgrounds, but whatever you do in a vineyard, he's just picking them up all day long. And then finally gets down to 5 o'clock. I mean, quitting time is 1 hour away. And he drives back. Now, who would have been out there at 5 o'clock? If they've been out there since 5 a.m., if you will. Who would still be out there at 5 p.m.? Not the people, not the workers who you would have gotten your money's worth out of for the day. I mean, I look out this morning at Cornerstone Community Church. I see so many fine specimens of manhood before me. The Tom Foxes of the world would have gotten snapped up at 5:30 a.m. Am I right? He's not hanging around until 5 p. because they know I'm going to get to work this guy like a rented mule and I'm going to make some money today. The Eric Smiths of the world are going to be hanging around at 5 p.m. Probably people who are physically disabled. Maybe somebody who's lost an arm in a farming accident. Maybe somebody who's on crutches. People who really know there's probably no hope that anyone's actually going to hire me today, but I'm still going to stand out here. Because what am I going to do? Sit at home? That's even more shameful. And this guy looks at the rest of these dregs of society who are out there in this marketplace, and he says, all right, the rest of you, let's go. And we can even picture him helping put wheelchairs in the back of the truck and crutches and guiding those with visual impairment, perhaps, into the vehicle to get them to the vineyard. And they can't believe it. No one ever hires them. No one ever pays attention to them. And this guy has freed them. I mean, he's picked them for the team. And they're not expecting to make any money. But for goodness sake, to be wanted, to be included, that's a huge win for all of these people who are left at the 11th hour. So they get back out there, and about 30 minutes after they get back to the vineyard, the whistle blows because it's quitting time. And so the vineyard owner gets his foreman. He says, okay, line them all up. And I want you to pay the last guys first. And again, they're not expecting to make any money. They're just really happy to be there. And sure enough, that foreman takes out a denarius and he pays them for a full day. They worked like 33 minutes, if you can call it work. And they get a full day's pay. These guys were in last, and they get treated like they're in first. And that's when it hits you. Man, I knew something was different about this owner. But there's something really different about him, because he apparently is not running this operation for any kind of personal profit at all. This guy's not interested in going into business for what he can get. This guy's gone into business for what he can give. I mean, he's going to take a loss on this day, is he not? He's paying out people for a full day's wage when they didn't do 25 minutes worth of good work. He spends his whole day burning gas or burning his mule or whatever they're using to get back and forth to town. He's wasting his whole day doing that. This guy's not interested in getting anything from them. He's interested in giving. His whole mindset all day is, how generous can I be to the people who never expected and never deserved generosity? That's what this vineyard keeper is like. I mean, it's a picture of comical, extravagant, beautiful grace. It's just like that Luke 14 passage that I'm not a good enough preacher to be able to preach well at Cornerstone this morning, where the banquet keeper says, I want you to go into every alley and under every bridge and every park bench, every guy sleeping under a newspaper, and you bring in the poor and the crippled and the blind and the lame, and we are going to sit them down in a banquet hall with white linen tablecloths and champagne and cold pheasant and ice sculptures, and we are going to be generous to somebody tonight. I want my house to be full That's the heart of this vineyard owner. He just wants to be generous because that's just who he is. And what Jesus is wanting us to see at the very beginning of this story, it lays the foundation for everything else that is to come, is that if you have been included in the kingdom of God, this is your story. This is your story. This is what it feels like to receive grace, what these 11th hour guys received, and really what those first hour guys received. This is what it's like to receive grace, and this is how the kingdom of God works. I don't know what you've heard about God, but he is not out looking to see what he can get out of you. He's out to see what he can give to you out of his own kind and merciful and generous heart, just because he loves to. The gospel of Jesus Christ tells us that the Son of God who dwelt in glory in Isaiah 6, John said he was looking at Jesus when Isaiah had that vision in Isaiah chapter 6. But that Jesus who's so holy and glorious, the angels have to cover up their faces and their feet as they draw near to him. He stepped way down from his position of honor. And he condescended to come down among us and to become one of us when we were utterly helpless, while we were still weak, could not help ourselves out. Our only hope was for someone else, someone rich, someone strong, someone good to intervene on our behalf. There are all kinds of ways to describe our sinful condition in the New Testament, and Jesus is emphasizing this one here in Matthew chapter 20. Just helpless, passive. Is anyone going to have mercy on me? And Jesus did have mercy on you. And Jesus has run the roads day and night. He has given costly grace to people who didn't expect it and who didn't deserve it. He chose you. He says, you come with me. You couldn't make that transaction happen. He had to make it happen. And he says, you come with me, and I will take your shame on myself, and I will take my dignity and put it on yourself, and I will take your poverty away and give you my riches. I will give you the future that ought to belong to me alone. I gladly include you in it. You ought to be in last, but I'm going to treat you like you're in first. And Jesus went to the cross, and he was shut out in the outer darkness under the wrath of God against my sins. Jesus says, treat me like I'm in last so that Eric can be treated like he is in first. And united with me in my resurrection, he will share in all the inheritance that I have come into me. That is silly grace. That's what Matthew 20 is trying to highlight for us here. It is, we get used to it, we get jaded to it, but it is ridiculous, comical grace. We have stumbled through the wardrobe into Narnia. That's the gospel. And if you are a Christian believer here today on your worst day, this is your story. And you are up to your eyeballs in the grace of God. And if you are here today and you have never given yourself wholly and completely to the Lord Jesus Christ, I don't know what you've heard about him. I don't know what you think about him. But this is what God is like. Jesus came down from heaven to tell us that this is what he's like. You can trust him. That's grace. Isn't that good? I don't know if y'all are a talking church or not, or an amen church, but this is good. It's a portrait of grace, and that's where we have to begin everything. And this sounds to me like a pretty good place to end the sermon. And that's something everyone can say amen to. Yes, end the sermon here. A good place to end the sermon and go to the Lord's table. My goodness, how good. But Jesus says, no, we don't need to end the sermon here. We need to keep going because there's more to the story of extravagant, comical grace than what you've heard so far. We need to move now to the problem of grumbling. The problem of grumbling. I mean, do you remember those first hour guys? You know, I did my best to paint the picture. They got picked up in the first hour and brought to the vineyard, hopeless and helpless and all that kind of thing. It was like a Hallmark movie, wasn't it? But the Hallmark movie is about to become a Lifetime movie. Because these guys are standing in line, and they're watching the foreman doling out this money. They see the 11th hour guys get the denarii, and we're all saying, oh, it's so sweet, it's so precious, that landowner. But they've got a calculator in their heads, because they start thinking, man, I knew this guy was nuts, but I didn't know he was crazy like that. And if he paid them 1 denarii for not even 1 hour, and I've been here for 11 hours getting after it. I didn't go to college or anything, but I think that's 11 denarii. They've done got it spent by the time they get to the front of the line. And they're thinking about all that's coming to them now. And this idea becomes an expectation. And y'all know what happens when we form expectations of what's coming to us and what's due us and what's just and what's fair. That's what they start thinking about as they get to the front of the line. They are ready to receive that big pile of denarii in their hands from the foreman. And then lo and behold, what did they receive instead? 1 denarii. Exactly what the owner told them they would get for working for him. And like that, everything changes. Everything changes. That grace sours very quickly, instantaneously. It's a scene that gets played out in the scriptures over and over again. This move from grace to grumbling. It's the people of Israel moving from dancing and singing and using tambourines and stuff in Exodus chapter 15 to grumbling just a chapter or so later that God isn't providing them bread and water the way they want, when they want, the way they thought he would do it. It's the same kind of move that we see taking place at the end of the book of Jonah, who's just fresh out of the whale vomit by the mercy of God, and now he's just been enjoying this shade under this umbrella tree or whatever it is, and he's angry at God for rescuing those Ninevites. It's the same scene that we see outside the party of the father for the prodigal son in Luke chapter 15, the older brother refusing to come inside, grumbling. That's a word that carries a lot of theological freight in the Bible, I think. And it's a picture of what happens so quickly in the hearts of the recipients of grace when we get our eyes off of God and onto other people. And apparently, if the Bible's going to keep painting this scene over and over again, apparently it's something we kind of need to deal with. So can we talk? We need to talk about this problem of grumbling that Jesus is highlighting here in Matthew chapter 20. How does this grumbling take place? How does this move from thankfulness and joy to discontentment and anger and envy and bitterness and all that sour stuff that we all know far too well in our own hearts? Well, it happens when our hearts make at least 3 moves that these guys make. I see 3 heart moves going on with these first hour workers, and they happen so quickly. And we might say it this way: if you would like to spend the rest of your life miserable and joyless, dragging your feet and gritting your teeth all the way home to heaven, if that's how you'd like to spend the rest of your Christian pilgrimage, then just do what these guys do. Number 1, obsess about others. Obsess about others. Look at this. Verse 10, now when those hired first came, they thought they would receive more, but each of them also received a denarius, and on receiving it, they grumbled at the master of the house, saying, these last worked only 1 hour, and you have made them equal to us. If these guys had just gotten their if he'd have just paid him in a way that would have made sense. This guy's got no tact, has he not? If he'd have just paid these first guys first and not brought up the subject of what he's given these other guys, we wouldn't be in this situation, would we? Because they would have been tickled to death to get that 1 denarii. They were tickled about it that morning, and they would have gone home just blissfully ignorant about how merciful he was being to the rest of them. But apparently the sinner was trying to make a point. Jesus does things like that. And the minute that they see what those other guys get, that bunch over there, the rest, them, they say, that guy, he worked 43 minutes. I timed it. His shirt's not even dirty. It's like that deodorant commercial where the guy didn't have any sweat stains. That's that guy. He hadn't done anything. Look at me. I'm filthy. I've been breaking my back for you all day. That guy has contributed nothing, and now you're treating me like I'm on a level with him. This guy that nobody wanted. This guy who got left at the marketplace till the end of the day. I'm not like him. I'm more valuable than him. And yet you're giving him all this good stuff that I deserve, that we all know I deserve. And the first step in spoiling grace in our hearts is to just keep your eyes on other people and keep very careful track of all the good gifts that God sends into their lives. Just make sure you take note every single time that guy who does the same thing that you do at work gets a promotion. Make sure you see every single time that guy with that other kid, his kid makes the team or gets his picture in the newspaper and yours doesn't. Just take careful note every time at church, this other person who does this thing that you kind of would like to be noticed for because you work real hard at it, when they get noticed for it instead and are complimented for it and praised, and people say, man, isn't it awesome how so-and-so does this? And you're thinking, hey, so-and-so does this all the time. If you want to grumble against grace, if you want to be a discontented person, the place to start is obsessing about others and all the good things that they have. Look at his house. Look at her metabolism. If I had that metabolism, I could eat whatever I wanted to. Man, look how stylish he is. He's so cool. Everybody thinks that he's so cool. He's not so cool. Just be the blessing police. I recommend spending a lot of time on social media. That will cultivate this skill of obsessing about other. Well, there go the Smiths going on another vacation. Must be nice to just leave all your responsibilities behind and get to go to yet another exotic location. How awesome for them. Just obsess about others, and you will surely be joyless. A second thing that happens, though, is they exaggerate their own efforts. They exaggerate their own efforts. You know, at the beginning of the day, if you'd have asked them, if they'd gone home for lunch or whatever, and the wife said, hey, honey, how's your work going? Honey, this is the best thing that's ever happened to me. This owner is so great. He came and picked me up himself. I'm working in this vineyard. It's wonderful. This is what we've been praying for. I'm so thankful to have this work. But listen to how he's talking now. Listen to the way that he describes his work environment now. Verse 12, these last worked only 1 hour. You've made them equal to us, who've borne the burden of the day in the scorching heat. Man, this is a hellhole. This is a sweatshop you got us breaking our necks in all day. I almost got killed out there today. This is the worst working environment I've ever been in, and this is how you thank me? And if you want to be miserable, and if you want to grumble against the grace of God, then while you've got your eyes on other people, make sure you're comparing them to what you're doing, what you're contributing, how much more deserving you are, how much more valuable you are to God and to his kingdom. And exaggerate your efforts. Man, I mean, we can do this in church. There's so many examples of this, but I mean, how many times in church here's the old 80-20 principle, 20% of the people do 80% of the work, you know? I'd hate to see this bunch in the shape they'd be in if I wasn't around anymore. I don't know how they'd get along without me. It's on and on. Every place we are, we've got an opportunity to do this. I see this is the 13th time in a row that I'm the one unloading the dishwasher. And we just meditate on your own martyrdom and all the sacrifices that you make and all the work that you do, and you will be sure to be joyless. And then finally, what's rooted in all of this is accusing the owner. Accusing the owner. We see it right here in verse 11. Who are they grumbling against? It's really not so much those 11th hour workers, although they don't like them a whole lot either, but they're grumbling against the master of the house. The master of the house. You have made them equal to us. You are the one who does not see what's right. You're responsible for this injustice, this unfair wage structure. And Jesus is showing us something really important here, that behind all of my whining over things big and small, ultimately, I am accusing God himself at the way that he's directing my life. What I'm saying is, God, you don't know what you're doing as you're writing the script. Let me borrow the pen for a few minutes and I can make some much needed corrections. We think that we know better than God. We think that we are better than God. That our intentions toward ourselves are better, kinder, more tender than God's are. Otherwise, why would he be treating us the way that he's treating us in comparison to these other people? And so just like in that story of Jonah and in the story of the prodigal and the elder brother, there's a heart problem towards the Father. There's a heart problem towards God. And here's what I've learned about this subject from vast experience with my own grumbling heart. If you so choose, you can spend the rest of your life like this, focused every single day on how unfair your life is and how unjustly you're being treated and how you're getting a raw deal, everyone else has got it great, and God really needs to make some corrections. And I've spent many a week unnecessarily miserable doing that. And if we're not careful, this thing can get away from us and we can spend a whole lifetime living like this instead of giving glory and praise to the God who snatched us up at the beginning of the day or the middle of the day or whenever he did. So we see this problem of grumbling. It reminds me of C.S. Lewis's book, The Great Divorce, where he describes hell as a place where people are just always blaming everybody for all their problems. It's a problem of grumbling. We need to move, though, finally, to being a people of gratitude. And that's where Jesus takes us, a people of gratitude. Here's the good news. Jesus sees you and me with our grumbling hearts on a Sunday morning. And not only is he eager to forgive us, he is eager to bring change into our lives. He is eager to minister his mercy to us. I mean, the Father went out of the party to the elder brother to plead with him to come in. He wants us to join in the laughter of grace. He wants to bring us back to that place where all those workers were at the very beginning of the day, and he's able to do it. And we can go there with the Lord's help if we'll listen to the words of this owner who's very gently and tenderly dealing with these malcontents here in the vineyard. How can we do it? Well, notice, first of all, I'll try to be quick here. First, focus on God's faithfulness. Focus on God's faithfulness. Look at verse 13. He replied to one of them, "Friend." Is that not encouraging? That when I whine, when I groan, when I throw God's gifts back in his teeth, he looks at me and calls me friend. Verse 13, "Friend, I'm doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for a denarius? Take what belongs to you and go." I don't think he's saying, get out of here. I think he's saying, just go home and rejoice in what I've given you, that you've had a good day today. And I've done exactly what I told you I would do for you today. Things went bad for these workers when they got their eyes on others. And what this owner is saying, you need to get your eyes back on me and the relationship that we have and the transaction that we agreed on, which is so, so good and so, so merciful to you. The reality is that owner didn't owe this guy a job. He didn't owe him anything. It's all been grace. And the reality is that the Lord doesn't owe us anything, does he? It's all grace. Everything. There is not one promise that Jesus has ever made to any one of us that he has failed to keep. As Joshua would say, not one word of God has fallen to the ground in your life. But the one who sought us out, found us, chose us, gathered us up, put us to meaningful work in his kingdom, all of grace, and then rewards us for doing the things that he gave us the want to do in the very first place. He's been faithful to us, and he will be faithful to us. And if we'll focus on that there has never been a step we've taken when we have been left alone. But he who promised is faithful. I will never leave you or forsake you. And if we'll focus on his faithfulness, I think that we will find that grumbling is going to start getting crowded out, just like that brother prayed earlier today. His love is going to be poured into our hearts, and there won't be much room left for grumbling at what he's doing in the lives of others, which leads to a second change of focus. We need to submit to God's sovereignty. Submit to God. Look at the middle of verse 14. Take what belongs to you and go. I choose to give to this last worker as I give to you. Am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me. It's very clear. He's underscoring this. I choose. It belongs to me. I can distribute it as I please. Jesus doesn't have to check in with any of us before he blesses our brother, before he blesses our neighbor. It's all his to begin with. He didn't have to check with anybody before he blessed you. It all overflowed and spilled out of his glad and generous heart to us, and we're so thankful. And what the Bible teaches us again and again, and this is, I have to return to this constantly, Hebrews 12, God has set a course before each one of us. He has set a course before each one of us that he wants us to run in the Christian life. And he's done that for every single one of us. And each of our race courses have particular challenges. We don't always see everybody else's challenges when we're just focused on their blessings, but everybody's race course has challenges. And I don't want to minimize the challenges that some of you may be walking through today that far exceed anything I've ever had to know. But everyone's got challenges as they follow Jesus. Everyone's got suffering, but everyone also has unbelievable blessing and gift and opportunity and mercy that not everybody else sees either. And the call to each of us today, so I have to preach to my own heart daily, I need to run the course that he set before me. And these are the kids he wants me to have. This is the wife he wants me to have. This is the church that he wants me to be a part of. This is the job that he's given to me. These are the health conditions that I have. These are all these things. None of this escapes his knowledge or his attention, and he is eager to get down in the trenches with me as I run this course. He can choose to do what he wants to do, but it's not this distant sovereignty. It is a loving sovereignty of a wonderfully warm Father. And nothing's going to enter my life that doesn't pass through his fingers first. And so I can submit to his sovereignty joyfully. Lord, if this is the set of circumstances you've placed in my life, it must be for my good. And I don't have to just be thrilled with every second, but I can be thrilled that you're with me every second. And I can trust that you're going to bring me through it in your way at the right time. Y'all understand what I'm saying? I'm really insecure, so I need a lot more feedback actually than this. But I'm actually quite proud of myself with how well I've done so far. So first we need to focus on God's faithfulness. We need to submit to God's sovereignty. I can't help but think of Peter and John at the end of John 21, where Jesus tells Peter all the things that he's going to do in his life. There's going to be some suffering that's going to come into play at some point. It's all still kind of mysterious. And then he looks at Peter and says, now, Peter, I've just forgiven you for a bunch of stuff, so just follow me, okay? I love you. And Peter says, okay, I'll follow you. And not the next verse, he turns around and looks at John and says, well, what about him? I mean, is he going to be like crucified upside down in the waves or whatever it is that happens to me? I mean, is he going to have this suffering that's going to come to me? I just want to know. And Jesus says, well, actually, Peter, let's just take about 15 minutes. I'm going to tell you exactly what I'm going to do in John's life. Is that what Jesus says? He says, Peter, I love you. Stay in your lane. If I want John to be 8,000 years old and be kicking and shouting when I come back, that's my business. You just follow me. I'll take care of John and I'll take care of Peter. You just take care of following me. You can trust me. All right, finally, we need to rejoice in God's generosity. We need to rejoice in God's generosity. I find this last question of verse 15 haunting. Or do you begrudge my generosity? Like, I've been super generous to you, so when I just turn around and I'm real generous to somebody else, do you not like it when I'm generous to other people? And we all know what the answer to that question is. You better believe I begrudge your generosity. I mean, I love it when it's heading in this direction. Back the truck up over here. But I don't like it when you're generous to others. I want them to get strict justice, as a matter of fact. And if they work for 30 minutes, I want them to get 30 minutes worth of grace. And if I worked 11 hours, I want 11 hours. But Jesus says, I think all through the scriptures, that one of the most important and beautiful signs of spiritual maturity is being able to rejoice when God is generous to somebody else. Somebody who you specifically don't think deserves it. Maybe it's the church down the road that you think is kind of wonky in their theology or whatever. And man, people are getting saved and people are speaking so well of them. People talk about how exciting and fun it is to go to that church and all that kind of thing. It just drives you nuts. And man, it's just God's way, isn't it, sometimes? Not that we don't need to try to be as faithful as we can to Scripture and so forth. We all got to do that. But, man, there's a problem with my heart if every time God is good and opens his hand of blessing to somebody else who isn't just like me in every way, if I do the Jonah 4 thing every time that happens, I'm probably the common denominator in a situation here. Does that make sense? I mean, is it not true that when you get to like Romans 12:15, that when Paul says, rejoice with those who rejoice, mourn with those who mourn, it's way easier to mourn with those who mourn. Now, it's not super easy to enter into someone's suffering and to care for them and to take their burdens on, but it's way easier to do that because you're kind of happy that that bad thing didn't happen to you. It's way easier to do that than to genuinely rejoice with somebody else who's rejoicing, especially when they got something that you really wish that you got to. It's hard to do, but what a mark of the Spirit of God conforming us to the image of Jesus Christ when every time we see God putting his own generosity on display. That's really the key, isn't it? I'm thrilled to see God being generous to you because that's just what the Lord is like, and that just shows the world what the Lord is like. He is so good. If I can get to that place where your kid making the team makes me just as happy as if my kid made the team. And you having another baby shower makes me just as happy that for right now, I'm not getting to have that baby shower. Or to flip it the other way, that you're not having to have a baby shower, and here I am having yet another baby shower. If I can rejoice with the kindness of God in your life, I think that Jesus is present in those moments. And grace is doing its work. That's the real stuff. That's the real stuff of the Christian life, is when I am delighted every time I see Jesus and his goodness being spotlighted, even if it's in you, or even if it's somebody out there, or wherever it may be. Well, I can't think of a place that's better to move our hearts in this kind of gracious, humble, thankful direction than the Lord's table. Man, I love coming to the Lord's table. And I'm so honored and thankful that the Lord is going to serve us here today and that I get to be a part of it. What I'm going to ask you to do now is if you'd bow your heads and in just a few moments of silent prayer as we wait for Pastor Lee to come and provide instructions for us about the Lord's table, and those who might be serving will come and take their places as well. Let's ask the Lord to do his work in our hearts. We can trust him as he does it. If we came to church this morning and our heart is not at that place of gladness over grace, but it's more at a place of grumbling, let's ask him to move it in the right direction. He loves to answer those prayers. He's so good to do it. Let's bow our heads as we prepare for instructions.